Hello, I hope you all are doing so well. Maybe not. It's been a rough couple of weeks. So I just want to kind of talk about what I've been seeing going on, what I've been experiencing, just to kind of perhaps help give you some context. Um, so we're really in the thick of it, which is really, really exciting because what we are seeing happening is as we move through and release these traumas from our fields, as these energies are being revealed to us, we are accessing these levels that we have not had access to in the past. So this can feel incredibly, there's a sense of compression, a sense of suffocation with these energies, a sense of being kind of walled in with all of this. And part of that is the pressure, right, of this is kind of the natural way we work through energies and how they're released in our field is to experience the pressure of it, right, in order to release it. But these particular energies are a little bit different. So part of what's happening is the divine feminine being called to go into the depths of her wounding. So these would be traumas that are held in her field for many, many lifetimes, right? And we know what happens when we have a trauma, when there's a traumatic event, that creates like a rip in the field where these trauma programs are then embedded, right? So we're always looking, what we're discovering, right, is that we're always looking at two aspects when we're dealing with an energy release, right? We're looking at the actual trauma itself, and then we're looking at the cause of the trauma. So we're talking about like these original traumas in the field, right? Because what happens is it sets the stage to be this kind of energetic collector in that wounded space in the field. So when the original trauma occurred, now keep in mind the trauma programming is intentional to keep your energy field stuck, right? So based on that, we can look at that and say, okay, so there was an external directed intention for your energy field to become distorted and to become fractured. So we're not just dealing with the trauma of, let's say, a death or some kind of catastrophe that happened. We're also dealing with the other half of that, which is that there's an external controlling force whose intention was to rip through the field to cause this tear, which would cause this continuous loop now in every lifetime that you have, where you can, again, it becomes this collection site, right, for wounding. So this is a bit different because probably a lot of the stuff we've been dealing with, we relate to things that have happened in this lifetime. We kind of go back, we're like, okay, here's where it happened before. We get that conscious understanding of it so that we can release it out. What's happening now, though, we're going back even farther to these original places. So the really kind of stuff we haven't maybe dealt with on an individual level, which is the fact that there are controlling forces that want to keep us in the dark, right? This can be really heavy. Even though we have a conscious knowing and understanding of that on some level, when we actually come up against it in our own field, it feels unbearable. It feels like insurmountable, right? Like, what is this machine thing energy that has been in my life, been in my field, been controlling my experience of my life? It's pretty daunting. But this is also where we're seeing the base of what the matrix system is run on as well, right? All of this energy siphoning, all of the sexual distortion, all of this energetic harvesting, and the way that's done, not only in the energetic realms, but a lot of that transfers over into the physical realm and starts to get acted out physically as well. And this is where we see all of this kind of what we're describing as pedophilia, right? Now, the energy system behind that we see is much different. It's not like that's just like, okay, let's make people attracted to young children in order to torture them and ruin them. That's not really the basis of the underlying energy. It's much more complex than that. But in the physical reality, it leads to that kind of behavior, right? So if we're just looking at someone who is exhibiting these things, right? Like being attracted to a younger child in a sexual way, if we're trying to resolve it in the context of that box, we're not going to get anywhere, because it really has nothing to do with that. It's the energy behind it, right? So this is what we're feeling. It's like, okay, I can't just look at the fact that I have an addiction to alcohol or whatever it may be, right? Like, and just stop drinking, right? It's what is the energy that is behind that that's causing these behaviors. And this is the stuff we've really not maybe delved into before, or had the chance to delve into in this way, right? And it's scary because it's like you're looking at the root cause of what's going on, and this is the stuff that most of us do not really want to see. Even though, again, for those of us who are more consciously aware, right, we know these things go on, we can feel it, we've always felt it. This is why we've always felt miserable and depressed all of our lives. You know, we pick up on these undertones, but nobody else is, it's not physically apparent or visible to us. Nobody else is really talking about it. Nobody else is really feeling it around us. So we feel like a misfit. We feel like there's something wrong with us. And it's not that at all. It's that we feel the mechanics of the distorted system that we exist in, right? So part of why this is so crucial for light beings right now is to understand this is the root of your feelings about yourself. So what happens is that, trying to figure out which way to go with this story here. Okay, so in general, let's just say, because we are so sensitive, right? That is our gift. But there's a reason for it. And our work is to come in and to feel into what is wrong in these systems, right? And so what happens is we arrive here and we say, oh my God, this is a sexual predator. Like, this is a pedophile. This is not right. Like, we start to get agitated and we're like, what the heck is wrong? Because we're so sensitive, because we can feel it. What we're really doing is rooting this stuff out, right? Like, we have these really high level abilities to flush these things out in a way that normal people around us do not, right? So, but what happens is then these like normal people look at us and say, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you that you see that as being sexually predatory? Like, that's gross. What's wrong with you? It's not us. It's the fact that we can pick up on it. And they assume, or they, you know, whatever this is, this conclusion that they come to, that the reason you can pick up on it means that something's wrong with you. Something must have happened to you. You're gross. What's wrong with you? That you know what that is about. Right? And then we feel the shame and the guilt, and we're like, oh yeah, you're right. Like, I better not say. Because as long as I don't say it, then nobody's going to look at me like something's wrong with me, right? So it's that our navigational system is so highly tuned and accurate. And this is what we're supposed to do, right? This is our job, is to come in and say, hey, this doesn't fit with source alignment. And yet people don't want to hear that. They don't want to see that, because they want to maintain their status quo. They want to, don't rock the boat, right? And that's a natural reaction. It's like, shoot the messenger. It's like, I don't want to know what's wrong in my world. And it was fine until you pointed it out, and now you're making me uncomfortable, right? So it's like this attack that we feel from this realm. It's very, very real, right? We come up with all kinds of ways to try to describe, oh, I'm too sensitive, I'm too empathic, I have to protect myself. It's not that. It's not that at all. In fact, it should be the opposite, which is that we feel these things and we flush it out of the energies, right? Instead, what happens, because of this physical reality, because we're human and we have these human emotions and we see people's reactions, we suddenly are like, oh, what? And they're mirroring to us what they're, right? It's like we are showing them what is wrong, and they're also then reflecting that back to us. And we are not recognizing that what they are showing back to us is really the distortion in the system, not us. We're picking up on it, right? We're like, we bring that signal to the surface to make other people aware of what's going on in this earth body, right? Let's say. So it's like we are kind of the transmission then for what's happening to bring it to the surface. And yet people look at us like, wait, you're the cause of it. You're the cause of it. It's like, no, we're not. Right? So we confuse their reaction then, and we start to shame, to compress, to shut down. And then all these energies are able to continue to perpetuate, right? And now we're a part of the system because we too have become complicit, right? So I got to see this in a very real physical way, where it finally clicked for me. So I just kind of want to share this story. So if you followed any of my videos, it's been an issue for me with my daughter. Not for me necessarily, but my daughter has issues with these schools. And I realized so vividly yesterday, exactly as I was kind of describing, right, how this plays out now. So she is incredibly sensitive. She does have a lot of trauma in her past, which also, so the interesting thing about having trauma in your life, right, it's not that the trauma makes you sensitive. You are sensitive. When you have the trauma, what is interesting about that is that it helps. So as a light being, you come here into human body, right? It's like, but you don't necessarily understand the human world. So when you have this trauma, you have this cellular, let's say, relationship with this experience. And it enables you to be able to put into words what the trauma does, how the trauma works. And when I mean trauma, it's talking about these distorted energies, right? So in a world where we have to communicate through words, right, in order to make things apparent for others, right? How do you communicate? Like I said, what we see as pedophilia, it's a much larger system of control of energy siphoning and harnessing through the masculine fields predominantly, that creates this external experience, but also the external display that we now call pedophilia, right? So when we experience the trauma, what we're doing is experiencing the distorted energy in our cellular body. So now we've run this through the human field, right? So now we are able to describe what happened, the feelings we have, these kinds of things, where we can start to share this with the external world, right? Now, what happens is we have these, like the psychology field, right? Which kind of, what they do is they observe multiple displays of similar patterns, and then they label it, right? But what happens there is they label it as wrong, and let's fix the person who's displaying this energy, rather than what is the underlying energy issue? Where is this coming from? Let's deal with that, right? But of course, from a human perspective, unless you're kind of aware and conscious on a spiritual level, it's hard to understand it that way, right? So, but yet, those of us who have experienced trauma, that's where we go to seek help, right? Is from people who supposedly have seen these physical patterns of things happening in the past and understand them. And so we go to them like, what is wrong with me? Okay, well, there's nothing wrong with you. It's that you have experienced the distortion of energy and you're trying to make sense of it. So you're going to someone who has had a history of supposedly assisting others who have had those same energetic patterns. But what happens is, again, it's a system that encourages this complicit acceptance of what is going on, right? Again, it's about fixing the transmit. It's not, but we're not transmitters of that energy, right? There's a different word that I need to be using that I can't get here. It's like a projector, this viewing screen, right? We show up as this view, this screen on which we can display what's actually happening, right? And yet we see it and experience it, and we're told it's something much different, which is that, no, we're the problem, you're the problem. No, we are just showing up as the screen that shows the story, shows the movie of what's going on energetically in the world, right? So we really need to shift how we see ourselves, how we understand ourselves in this way, right? It's like, I am not the problem, but my body, my experience, my energy field is the movie screen on which the rest of the world can learn to understand what's going on in their own bodies, what's going on in this earth body, what's going on in this realm as far as these negative, dark energies. So my daughter came to me yesterday and said she was feeling very uncomfortable with this English assignment. So she started telling me that she had to read this short story, and she's like, I don't know, I don't even know how I'm going to talk about this. It makes me so uncomfortable. So I said, okay. I'm like, what is this story? Send it to me. But I was just so bothered by her distress about it that I, when I came to my office, I'm like, I'm just going to download this book. So I started reading this book, and in the first page, so she's a junior in high school. The first page of the book is about these two girls in this room in the middle of the night. The one girl starts masturbating, and the other girl is describing what she's seeing, right? The noises, the blankets moving. And then there's something about this male energy that comes to her, they call it a ghost, right? But this ghost that comes that she masturbates to. So naturally, I'm like, how is this appropriate for high school reading? And why is my daughter being asked to discuss this, right? So, of course, I put out an email to the teacher, and I told my daughter, don't worry about it. I don't care if you get a 0 on this project. You do not have to engage with this material. So it turns out that this book is actually a collection of short stories by this author, but she's written, all these books, or all these stories in this book, which are all very dark. They're all very much, all have sexual undertones to them. And if you look at a lot of the reviews, because at first, before I purchased the book, I was like, well, let me just go read the reviews and see what people are saying. And of course, the literary critics, right, are like, oh, she speaks in this way where this voice is just so real. And it's kind of what my daughter said too. She's like, why is this adult woman talking about young children in such a sexual way? How is she having this so vivid description of these children engaging in sexual behaviors, right? Which I was like, that didn't even cross my mind either, right? But it's interesting what my daughter can pick up on. So this story that she had to read, and it's a bit confusing, right? Because it's talking about girls that are raised by wolves. And at first, it's talking about the behavior of these girls acting like wild animals, right? So running around, overturning furniture, peeing all over the place. And that this home where they go, run by nuns, they're supposed to condition them or to, clear them of this kind of culture of wolf so that they behave like young human girls are supposed to behave. Right? So it goes through this strange thing, though, where it describes all these stages of this transition, how the student feels, how it feels separated, isolated, depressed, because it's now realizing there's a different way of living. But as they become more attuned and more immersed in this new culture, they look at their old culture and they can't imagine how those people ever lived that way, right? But then in the end, it's they send these girls back to these wolves as these conditioned, revamped young girls, right? So it's a little bit, it's again, it's not one, oh, we talk about wolves as being predatory animals, right? But these girls came from living with these predatory animals. So it's oh, well, they're not really sending them to the wolves, right? But this idea of this conditioning, and the creepy thing about it is the way that they describe the levels and stages of how the conditioning works and how the person changes. And yet, in the end, it's they send these girls back to these family of wolves now as these obedient children, right? So, and maybe that story in and of itself isn't the worst, but if you look at the other works this author has written, it's incredibly dark, right? And I brought this up to the teachers, and they said to me, it's a fun fantasy about a coming-of-age story and nothing more. And I thought, well, yeah, you can see it that way if you choose to, right? But again, it's one of these things, especially in light of everything that's coming to the surface right now in the world. Is that how you're going to choose to see the material that you're putting in front of students? And the problem I have with this too is that this is all about brainwashing, right? And so to sit students in front of this material, telling them just to go read it and not explaining to them what brainwashing is, what conditioning is, how it works, how we can control human behavior, I think it's very dangerous to put a mind that is not fully formed, an adolescent mind in front of this material and expect them to have their own emotions, own feelings, try and figure out what's going on in the story. I think it's highly confusing and it's highly abusive in this case, because we're talking about brainwashing and mind control and manipulation and conditioning. Not to mention how they throw in these different aspects of, are they wolves or are they girls? Is it a wolf family? What's really going on here? And the symbolism and all of this as well, right? Why is it only girls? It begs these questions of what is the undertone of this. And so my daughter, right, in reading this, she couldn't quite explain it in those, she wouldn't use those words, right? But she said, it makes me so uncomfortable. But then we did have this discussion and I said, yeah, it does have these sexual undertones. I read the other, stories in her work and they're really tough to read. And again, the whole book has gotten this kind of like, wow, she has such a fresh voice and such a good way of describing. And then people will comment, yeah, if you want to feel dark and depressed and like if you want to kind of just crawl in a hole and stay there, it's a good book to read. It's very depressing. But my daughter did even say, I said, because we were kind of talking about it. I was talking about her teacher's responses and the fact that, I wasn't sure at first, like, was my daughter just uncomfortable with discussing it or was it the material itself? And so they offered the option that she could talk to them in private, instead of with the group. And she said, no, I don't want to talk about it at all. And she said, Mom, I just think other kids can't pick up on that same thing. She's like, I'm aware of it. I'm sensitive to it. And it bothers me, but I don't think other not children, of course, she didn't call them that, right? But she said, I don't think other kids can feel that and know what's happening here. And she was actually very aware, of the kind of these dark, distorted sexual undertones. Like she even did speak to that a bit as we were discussing it later. So, and I know when I talked with the teacher, so this is where I want to kind of talk about what happens in the physical real world, right? So I got to see exactly how this plays out with my daughter, because when I was talking to the teacher and I was bringing it to her attention of how disturbing this story was for my daughter, she was like, oh, well, and I could hear the energy of her thoughts. I didn't realize it at the time, right? But thinking back, I'm like, yeah, I could feel that she was like, oh, what's wrong with her that this is bothering her, right? Like, what is in her past? Basically saying, do you have sexual abuse in your past? What's wrong with you? Like, what happened to you that you're aware that there's something in the story and it's triggering you, right? Instead of, no, the story itself is distorted and it's not organic and it's not natural. And that's the problem, right? So again, it's putting it on us. What's wrong with you? You're gross. Why are you talking about that? That's disgusting, right? Because they're like, no, it's a fun fantasy and nothing more. No, it's not. We're talking about sexual abuse here, basically. Sexual conditioning. Grooming. Sexual grooming. Which leads to conditioning girls to stay quiet and to say nothing when they do feel uncomfortable, right? I mean, this is what I saw with her. It's like these teachers were just like, there's nothing wrong with this. Like, we chose this and we read it. We know what's in here. And I'm like, well, you may at a certain level, but you're not feeling the deeper undertones of it, right? But yet with my daughter, like, she was feeling uncomfortable. But in that situation too, it was almost like, should she stay quiet? This is what we teach girls, right? When you're uncomfortable, you're okay. It's fine. Don't worry. Just it'll pass. It'll be okay. And how often do we say that? And they learn that. So when there really is an issue with a person that is making them uncomfortable, that are making sexual advances, or that are conditioning them to be in a situation where they won't be able to escape from then, right? It's not about, oh, someone's doing something sexual to you, which is inappropriate. It's how do you even get yourself into that room in the first place where you feel comfortable enough to then find yourself in a situation that you can't escape from. And that's the issue, right? It's like, it's not that, okay, it's not overtly sexual perhaps, but we're talking about conditioning someone's behavior. And that's not being discussed in school, I'm sure. So, and I did get a follow-up email too, right? Like, well, we really want to know more about her background because we want to be more sensitive to things that might trigger her in the future. And I was like livid because I knew that was the stance they were going to take, right? Something's wrong with her, and let's get her some better material that won't trigger her. Not the material itself is the issue. And this is what she's dealt with her entire school career, right? Is that she can see the incongruencies, she can see the hypocrisy. And not only that, she experiences it from the teachers, right? Where they're constantly like, yes, we'll help you, we'll figure this out, we'll get you, with your presentations, we'll help you figure out a different way so you don't have to feel uncomfortable in front of the class with your anxiety, whatever it is, right? And then they drop the ball. And basically she said to me, she's like, I just feel like all of these adults, they don't listen to me, they don't believe me, they don't take me seriously, and they don't help me when they say they will. And this is her source of just depression and anxiety with going to school now, right? She cannot trust adults to help her when they say they're going to help her, and to support her when they say they're going to support her, right? They treat her like an infant, where her emotions and her feelings and her emotional expression is not taken seriously. And this has been a constant for her. Like, she's incredibly emotionally intelligent, and she schools these adults in this. And what I have noticed now, since this happened yesterday, what I realized is that these adults really do not realize what's happening, right? And so my daughter is bringing this to the surface, and I'm having to, of course, as her parent, as her guardian, be the go-between, and to say, no, you cannot treat her this way. This is the issue. This is what needs to be done, right? And to teach them and show them, like, you can't just ignore the fact that, yes, okay, she's sensitive. That's why she feels these things. That is not the problem. The problem is the material. The problem is the environment in the school. And yet this is what the schools do, right? So they kind of compound this. But again, this is what we have experienced all of our lives, right? And it really made it so clear to me, the shame that we feel, where we think we are the gross ones, we're the disgusting ones, we're the ones who are talking about sexual abuse. How dare you? What's wrong with you? Who touched you and made you like that? Like, even if someone did touch me, it's not me, it's them. And it's the world that supports this and creates this and is refusing to see the underlying issues here, right? So this is what we are, right? We show up to expose this, and then we get attacked because it seems like we're the ones who are bringing this into the world, and it's the total opposite. So part of what's been going on for the Divine Feminine is that she is clearing out these deep traumas that have been holding her field down, right? Where she isn't able to feel this clearly, where she has been conditioned to beat herself up and feel like the one who's causing problems, right? But as she's doing this, right, the reason she's doing this is because there's something else much greater going on with these masculine energies now. And the way it's complex, but at its simplest, I guess, at this point, I would say there's a difference in the energies, where the masculine energies, now again, we're working interdimensionally, right? So this is masculine and feminine in your own field. Also, yes, your relationships. Also, yes, these greater groups or entities that we are connected to, right? So it's all of these things. So it's not just that I'm talking about like a relationship between a man and a woman, but sometimes that's the easiest way to understand, right? And that's generally where our mind goes. But this is in our own field as well, right? So we're clearing out all of this. So what happens is, as we clear the, let's say, that directed trauma from the controlling forces, from our feminine energies, then we start, it's like 2 steps of healing with this too, right? So in the feminine energy, it's about recognizing, yes, the traumas, but also this portion that this has been an external directed rip in your field, intentional rip in your field, right? To keep your light from expanding. So there's 2 parts for the feminine healing here. But then as the feminine energies come to their light and see this and understand this and let go of that shame, right? And understand, okay, it's not them, it's the directed energy, the directed distortion, the direct attacks and the targeting that has caused her to feel this way. Now she has to deal with her masculine energy, right? And the masculine energy is more, again, we always relate to this kind of physical matter state realm, right? But the actual cellular trauma now in the body, that the body takes on, that the mind starts to create stories around, right? So we have the energy level of that, but then also the matter state level of that. But this is always also where we can see the difference between women and men sometimes as well, right? So the men, and this is only certain ranges of light beings, let's say, or certain ranges of humans, where the men have a much more difficult time extracting themselves from this. Also because the masculine energy is being used. It's like their fields are being used to run this distorted system through, to project this distorted, it's not the distorted reality, it's projecting a reality beyond the distortion, right? So what you're looking at in the reality, as we said, right, is not exactly what the energy is actually doing. So it's projecting a false reality out into the world, right? So it's like, if you're looking at this though, and you're seeing this, how would you know that there's something wrong with it if it's showing up like this, like it looks like it's okay, right? And then the rest of the world is accepting and all these things too. So I know this is a bit complex and I'm not explaining it the best way, but what I'm trying to say is there's so many parts to what is happening right now, right? It's, yes, divine feminine, seeing these horrors, understanding it in order to be able to release from it. But then now we also have to come into the physical, very, very physical, what's happening right now. And so what we're seeing is a lot of masculines, the actual physical masculine embodiments, really struggling right now, feeling totally trapped in almost like it's a house of horrors. It's really kind of haunted feeling tones of energy. So feeling overwhelmed, in a lot of fear, totally confused, looping through mental programs, right? Just stuck, don't know what to do, everything you try is not working out kind of energy, right? A lot of fear. So even in our own bodies, right, even if we are a female, it's like we have almost this, the way I've been experiencing it too, right? Like I can feel it in my mind and I'm like, this is crazy. Like this feels like what I went through like a year or 2 ago with this level of fear and like feeling insane. Why am I feeling like, is this really related to my reality or what's going on here? It's the masculine energy, right? So, but again, at many levels, it's like, yes, my own masculine experience of what I had to go through in this realm, right? Trying to figure my shit out, like figure out I'm not the insane one, even though I feel like it most times, right? But then also picking up on the masculines that I am connected to who are having this experience, right? And that actually is much more visceral than our own energy within our own masculine tones, right, in our own field. And it's very real. It's happening and we've been seeing it. And it's kind of the best way to describe it is this house of horrors kind of experience. So it's definitely intense, but it's because there's a whole nother kind of realm that we've opened up into now. Again, because we have access to it, because of the light capacity and the light that we're holding and the light that's coming in, we can now move into these more shadowed spaces that we have been unable or even unwilling to really face, right? This is what I'm hearing from a lot of people, and I'm feeling it too. It's like, I don't really know if I can go into these energies. Like, I know I need to work with them, but they are really heavy and really dark, you know? But again, it's like, that is just fear. And it's these dark mother and these other energies of fear that are creating that feeling that it's too much for us to handle, right? So we have to also understand that's part of the programming. Oh, it's too much for me to handle. Oh, it's too much for you to handle. Okay, take it, right? So this is where we are almost giving away our power again. We have to be very careful. And this is what we're sorting through too, right? All these little nuances in our field, where before it used to be just a big mush of like, I'm empathic, I'm depressed, I have anxiety, I don't want to get out of bed, right? Now it's like, here's the tendril for this situation, here's the tendril for this situation. And look at, yes, you're being attacked and targeted, but also where you are then in turn giving away your power and becoming complicit because you feel like you're not strong enough to handle it either, right? So this is the issue where it's like, we cannot go back any longer. And yet to move forward, we can feel this kind of nasty energy we're moving into. Well, we've always been in it, right? But it's just coming to the surface so much now that it feels overwhelming and it feels like we can't handle it. But the truth is that we can. And the truth is that actually these fears and the feeling of all this kind of disgusting energy is really this big boulder, this big block in the way of us accessing our true natures, in the sense of what we have actually accomplished on this planet in the past, right? So we're talking about these ancient civilizations of Atlantis or Lemuria or whatever you may relate to, right? But at the time where these technologies were doing really good things, right? And then of course things were taken over by dark forces. But what these energies are trying to stop us from is moving into that place of knowing so that we can access the memories of when we worked quite well, right, with the light on this planet. And that's the big secret, right? Is like, they just don't want you to remember that you did that before, because once you recall that memory cellularly, consciously in your body, it's like total game over, you know? So the fear, so the heaviness, the density, the stagnation, all of this kind of horror that we're feeling is actually to stop us from moving into our true expression of ourselves, right? So again, it's about shedding all of this stuff and having these cellular recalls of all these times when we have done this before, you know? So it feels awful, it's scary, but that's also the game, right? Like, that's the whole point, is for you to feel like shit so you stop moving forward. So when we're talking about these sexual energies, right, a lot of what happens, what I've noticed for the divine feminine, is she always seems to have this question of this, like, there's this feeling in the energy field of like, there's something I'm not seeing, there's something I don't know. And if inevitably, it always leads back to this question of, was I sexually abused by my father or someone and I don't remember it? It's just uncanny how we all have this thought, right? It's so strange. But it makes sense, because what we are picking up on, again, is the underlying energy. And like I said, these underlying energies, it's not like there's an energy of like, here's pedophilia, and then it expresses as pedophilia, right? There's a whole system, and it manifests as what we call pedophilia. What's happening for the divine feminine is she's, again, picking up very strongly on these energies, questioning, right? What is this big dark secret in my field? Part of what's happening is we also have to take into account masculine energies, much more sexually abused, I feel, than the feminines. But we're starting to see all this coming up with the trafficking and things like this, right? Young girls, women, all these things. What about the men? Nobody talks about this. And it's my feeling that this is not based on anything except my intuition and my feeling. My sense is that actually young boys are sexually abused way more than girls. But it is, for whatever the reasons, right, totally swept under the rug, covered up, not talked about to a much larger degree, which is frightening to think how much we have swept under the rug all of the stuff we're seeing come to the surface now, and to know that there's a whole nother story here going on. So part of what we're also feeling is this pain, this suffering, this trauma, right? It's this kind of systemic abuse and eradication of masculinity, right? And this is like a huge secret that has yet to really come out. So the feminine, she's feeling this and picking up on it. She has no idea, right? So there's, again, this sense of like, what is this big dark secret in my field? You're picking up on the truth, right? But it may not be directly related to your female body in this lifetime. Although many of us have experienced sexual abuse as well, right? So I'm not saying that, but it's like this feeling of what is this thing, this boulder in the field again. But this boulder in the field is really about us being locked out of our memories of working very proficiently with the light, right? And really making massive changes on a physical level instantaneously, right? It's not like manifestation where we think something, we intend for it, and then it comes years late, right? It's not that. It's like we are literally shifting energies in real time and making changes. Yeah. And sometimes it has to flush through the body. You can feel this with healings too, right? It takes time to integrate it and shift, but that is quickening now. And as we release out of more and more of the trauma, and we're not having to deal with the trauma and the reversal of the programming in the body, then we're just working in full light. And then it's going to be like this, right? But it's like, first we've got to like raise this thing out of the sea, like, what is this thing? Oh my God, this big secret that's been hidden, which is that we've been siphoning through the masculine energies. And again, this is in our own fields as well, right? But we will see it play out in the physical, and it will show more clearly as male versus female energies. But this is a huge part of it too, right? So this, I just keep coming back to like, okay, yeah, this boulder, this big thing, it's, again, all of this is very painful for the heart. And if the heart is not open and online, and you don't have this belief in yourself of who you are as a light being, and you can't feel the truth of that expression that occurred in other lifetimes where you're like really honed into it, really connecting to it, you can't really do your work either, right? So all of this together combines in our fields to keep us down, to keep us stagnant, to keep us sad, to keep us from facing these things that we think are these awful secrets inside of us, right? And they're not, because it's not our fault that these things happen. And I think that's the biggest thing, especially for the masculine embodiments too, right? It's like the shame that I'm supposed to be the masculine, I'm supposed to be the protector, and I'm supposed to be this or that. And I'm not, like, in just this kind of what the world would call self-esteem or things like this, right? But we know that that's not even a thing. The reason it's a thing is because of the negativity that gets put on us. And then we label it something just to try to understand it. But then they say, oh, you got to work on your self-esteem. No, you don't. You've got to get the crap off of you, and then you'll feel fine, right? I don't know why I'm going to bring this up, but maybe it relates for someone. I think it's been on Facebook quite a bit too. So maybe you've seen this. But they were talking about this study that they did with the mice, right? And so they had 2 bottles of water. One was just regular water, and one was laced with like heroin or cocaine or something like that. And so what they said was, well, if given a choice, the mice chose the water that was laced with drugs and eventually killed themselves, right? Like they became addicted to it, and that's all they wanted. And they chose that over the regular water. But then somebody came along and said, well, but that's all they had was water. What if we create this environment where there's more to interact with, right? Like it's like Mouse Town. Like there's more mice, there's things to do, there's activities, there's food, there's fun, there's whatever. And what happened was they found they didn't drink that water that was laced with the drugs, right? So, I mean, there's a lot of things in this, right? Which is that, first of all, science is bullshit because it's still based on this initial premise or thought, like, as far as the human mind can expand, that's what it frames this work in, right? So if you can't expand your mind into infinite possibilities, you're going to draw conclusions that may be incorrect. But the second part of that is that, well, there's really nothing wrong with us. But if we're living in a system that doesn't support our expression and our expansion, we choose rather not to live, right? And this is what happens to us. It's like, even though, unfortunately, like maybe unfortunately isn't the right word, but we have this drive as light beings, like we can't give up. We just can't. Even if we wanted to in this lifetime, we just can't. But there's a reason for that too, right? It's like the light is here. And so we are supported. We just don't know it through our human, but we are. And so that's what keeps driving us. It's like the light knows, the light knows, the light knows it can get through this. It's trying to get the human online with this, right? But to kind of start to reverse this perspective that we have of ourselves. We are not the cause of the stuff that we are bringing to the surface. We are here to show what is beneath the surface so that people can start to heal. So I just got a phone call from the school about that story. So I don't remember where I left off. But to say that this was a very young guy who called me from the department. And I don't think he had a clue, and I kind of laid out, look, this is a perfect example of how conditioning works, right? Teaching our children to be quiet, to avoid these emotions that we're feeling. But this is exactly what we were just talking about too, with sexual abuse, young boys, young girls. The problem is sexual abuse is confusing, right? Because there's an element of it that does feel good. We're talking about the human body, right? The human body has feelings and sensations, and that's part of its purpose, right? But when these things are done to children at a very young age, where their mind cannot understand what's happening, it really messes them up. So, this is what we're feeling, right? It's this this cross wiring and this confusion of these energies. Right. And yes, a lot of it is related to sexual abuse and sexual trauma right now too. So it's everything, right? This whole kind of tower of energies that have been built up over all these lifetimes too, based on this system. So, okay. I think that's it. Besides to say, yeah, it's challenging our minds too, right? Like this is the other thing. It's like we can feel all these emotions inside of us. We can feel these things and we have no idea what it is. So it brings a lot of stress to the mind, and then a lot of fear, right? Because when we can't figure something out, we're like, what's really happening? What's going on? What's going to happen to me? We start to have these awful feelings of like, I'm going to fall off the face of the earth sometimes. But just know you're supported and it's okay. And we're going to get through this. I know it doesn't feel like it some of these days lately, for sure. But what we're doing is bringing the light into humanity, into the masses. It's never comfortable, right? We're having to show the world, like, look what you've done to yourself. Look what you've created. Look what you have told yourself you have to accept in order to survive here, and it's just not true, So then the sadness of this as well, right? Of like, we accepted these stories and we bought into this and we believe this. We did this to ourselves in some way as well, right? So it's like that element also, so much grief that's coming up around that. How we have allowed these things to perpetuate and actually served and played into these systems. So it's not a small thing that's happening right now. So if you're feeling awful, it's okay. You're right where you're supposed to be with this. So, all right, I'm going to leave that there. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your day. Take good care.